So the Lee-Enfield series of rifles started, of course, with the Lee-Metford, and they upgraded the barrels to 5-groove Enfield rifling. There were both rifles and carbines, and some of those guns saw service even after they were obsolete.
Militaries in the last part of the 19th century are still divided into component parts depending on what roles they play. There's the infantry, there's the artillery, and then there's the cavalry. And the cavalry and artillery both require separate arms from the infantry because they perform separate roles. And so when the British military adopts a new small arm, they can't just adopt a new infantry rifle and consider it done. They also have to consider what kind of specialized roles the cavalry performs and what kind of small arm they need in order to perform that role to the best of their abilities. And so what you have is, in addition to the development of the Lee-Metford and then subsequent Lee-Enfield rifles, the long Lees, you have the shorter cavalry carbines.
You first get the Lee-Metford carbines, and Lee, of course, comes from the action. Metford comes from the rifling, which is a lot of shallow grooves. And the British, in 1888, thought this was a great idea. The problem is smokeless powder comes in, and Metford rifling and smokeless powder do not provide optimum results. So shortly thereafter, the British adopt a 5-groove Enfield rifling, which is sharp cut rifling, and accuracy got better, fouling was reduced. And so you have this family of long rifles, we call them long Lees. Then you have this family of carbines, which were issued to British cavalry troops.
Its principal difference, besides its length and of course the configuration of the nose cap and so forth, is the fact that it's only got a 6-round magazine. And this is carried in a boot along with the saddle, and it's very effective during the Second Anglo-Boer War. Now, at the same time, while the Second Anglo-Boer War is still going on, New Zealand wants a carbine for themselves. And so these carbines are taken and reworked, except that they rework the front end of them to adapt the pattern 1888 knife bayonet. And the New Zealand carbines, there are very few of them made, a number in the hundreds.
The British trooper carried his carbine in a scabbard on his horse. And in combat, it was imperative that the trooper be able to quickly stash the carbine into the scabbard without any danger of it snagging. And so the entire design of the carbine was really oriented toward ensuring that there were as few snagging points on the gun as possible. So starting from the front of the gun, there's a very distinctive nose cap that has a very rounded profile that meets the muzzle. And on top of the gun at the muzzle, there's an enclosed front sight protector that not only serves to protect the front sight blade, it also shrouds it so that the blade itself doesn't snag on the scabbard as it's being inserted. As you move back on the gun, toward the middle, of course, there is the rear sight. Now, that's a rear sight leaf on a block, and that can't really be very easily contoured. And so the solution that they have to that is to actually build in a leather cover so that when the gun's not in use, the cover can be snapped on, and that provides a sleek profile over the top of the gun to reduce any snag points.
So the thing about being on a horse and having things jostle around, having your bolt handle, stick in the kidneys all the time is a bad idea. So what they did was they flattened the bolt handle, which made it a lot more difficult to manipulate, especially quickly. The other thing too is it takes a shorter magazine. They basically cut the magazine in half so it barely protrudes. You can tell it's a Lee-Enfield magazine, but the full 10-round capacity of the standard Lee-Enfield is not there.
The carbine itself was not only used by the British military, but they determined that it would be just a ticket to modify into a carbine used by the Royal Irish Constabulary, a peacekeeping force in Ireland. All they did was take the Lee-Enfield carbines, cut the forend back, put another wooden portion on it, and a forend tip so that they could affix a bayonet to it, and away you go.
The Irish Constabulary carbine comes out in 1905. They're usually marked on a roundel on the butt as being RIC. And there's several thousand of these made. Many of these were imported in the 1950s by different surplus arms dealers who were bringing them out of Ireland and out of England, and they were offered for sale in the US. They weren't actually very cheap back then, and today they command a premium.
The Lee-Enfield cavalry carbine is one of those Victorian vestiges that really go out with the end of the 19th century, because by the end of the 19th century, the role of the cavalry is diminishing somewhat, and the British military is really looking at unifying designs and coming up with an option that can work in any role equally well, rather than having dedicated designs for specific roles within the military. And so by the early 20th century, these cavalry carbines are functionally relegated away from mainline use, and eventually the compromise design emerges in the form of the short magazine Lee-Enfield rifle that becomes famous for its use in the First World War.